مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. من الناحية التاريخية الحزب الجمهوري أقرب إلى أن يكون دولة ملكية، فله زعيم واحد والذي أدت ما يكون المرشح الأكبر سنا والأكثر احتراما، وإن خسر يكون الزعيم التالي هو المرشح التالي الأكبر سنا والأكثر احتراما. وفي مقابل ذلك فإن الحزب الديمقراطي أدت ما يكون أشبه بساحة اللعب الأطفال، حيث يتقاتل الجميع على تولي الزعامة إلا أن يتبقى شخص واحد صامدا. هذا العام القصة مختلفة. لدى الديمقراطيين مرشح واحد جد، وهي وزيرة الخارجية السابقة هيلاري كلينتون، في حين أن الجمهوريين لديهم مرشحين يفوق عددهم عدد اللاعبين بفريق لكرة القدم. من هم هؤلاء الأشخاص؟ بماذا يؤمنون؟ كيف سيبرز مرشح واحد وسط الجموع؟ لمناقشة أمر مجموعة الرجال والسيدات الواحدة المتنافسين على ترشيح الحزب الجمهوري، يسرني أن أرحب باثنين من الخبراء السياسيين اللامعين، هما ترينت دافي وريبيكا بيرغ. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. Today we're focused on the Republican field for president. Normally you could fit them all around a table like this, but today you may need Yankee Stadium, where a baseball team plays. That's because there are so many candidates for the Republican nomination. And to help me dissect all this, I have Trent Duffy and Rebecca Berg. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Why do so many Republicans think that they can become president of the United States? Trent.
I think because they feel that they can beat Hillary Rodham Clinton in the general election, and that the party opposition to her candidacy is going to be so strong. I think that's one. I think second, there's become a new trend in American politics that when you run for president, you may be running for another office. For instance, Senator Graham might be running for Secretary of Defense, or to sell a book, or to do other things. So I think that there's this no-holds-barred new atmosphere in American politics, and everybody's throwing their hat in the ring. I mean, remember Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, two of the former Democratic presidents, were started out at the very lowest of the low when the Democratic primary started for them.
And that, I think,
Rebecca?
is an important point to make, actually, as well, that there's no clear front runner in the Republican field right now. And so any Republican who might have ambitions at being president someday looks at the field that's developing and says, well, why not me? Maybe I can win in New Hampshire or South Carolina or one of these early primary states with the votes so divided between so many people. And then that gives them a path to the presidency. So this is kind of the why not me primary. Any Republican who has ever thought about running for president says, you know, there's no prohibitive front runner in this race, so I'm just going to give this a shot and see what happens.
But it takes a lot of money to run for president. Is there enough money for each of these candidates to mount a serious campaign, Trent? Or
I don't know that for all of them it does, but I think that brings up another new trend in American politics, which is you have a lot of billionaires funding their own favored son or favorite candidate. And that, I think, is giving birth to a lot more candidacies, where in the past you would have the party establishment, if you will, backing one candidate and getting most of the money. So I do think that the fragmentation of money in politics is contributing to this trend.
Exactly. And so we see an election dynamic now where to run for president, essentially you only need one very passionate billionaire supporting you, and someone who's going to spend money on you for the duration, and you can last for basically as long as the election cycle. As long as you have money, you can keep running for president. And with super PACs, it only takes one very rich person.
Each one of these 15, 17 candidates has that sort of backer?
Not yet, not
No,
necessarily.
I wouldn't say all of them. I mean, I think in the top tier, the top 7 or 8, you do have that. I mean, Foster Friess is a very well funded billionaire who likes Senator Santorum and is probably contributing to his candidacy. And you have people like that, the Koch brothers, Sheldon Adelson. So there are, to Rebecca's point, a lot of billionaires who now can play politics.
And let's not forget what I would call the Rick Santorum effect. So Rick Santorum, of course, ran for president in 2012 and ended up in second place to the eventual nominee, Mitt Romney. But he started out at the beginning of the election cycle with no money, no name ID, no staff essentially, and really only this one billionaire backing him. But what he was able to do was catch fire in Iowa, win that contest, and then go on to actually place second in the nomination. So Republicans look at the field and say, well, even if I'm polling at 0%, even if I'm not even registering on national polls, maybe I'll have my moment in the sun and maybe I'll have my Rick Santorum moment.
So let's take a look at the field. I mean, you mentioned top tier or first tier and second tier. There's about 17, 18, maybe 20 candidates, probably multiple tiers here. Who would you say are the top three? Remember, we're talking to people 6,000 miles away. You can't expect them to know all 18. Who are the top three?
Right now, I would name Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, who is a senator, and Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker as my top three. But I would name those three with a caveat, that being that usually the people who poll this early as the top candidates, they don't always end up as the top candidates at the end of the day. A great example is New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani in 2008. At this point in the election cycle, he was polling well ahead of the other candidates, and he fizzled out very quickly.
Would you agree with that these are the three top candidates right now?
I would agree that those are the three top candidates. I would probably put Rand Paul a very close fourth if I had to pick a fourth. Because he captures the senator from Kentucky, that's right, who's trying to capture the libertarian voice and constituency within the Republican Party. But no, I think those three have what's most necessary for a long run, which is money, organization, and a geographical kind of following and a resume.
And of the second tier, or of everybody else, who are, let's say, three names that might surprise us and that are likely to be with us, if not to the very end, then pretty close to the end? Trent?
Well, Rand Paul, I would say. I also think that Governor Kasich, who just got into the race, is
John Kasich.
John Kasich from Ohio, which is a critical state for Republicans. No Republican has ever won the White House without winning the state of Ohio. And he's got the kind of resume that could really catch fire, and he's got a lot of fervent supporters. And he's got a kind of a new message in terms of reaching out for lower income Americans, which has kind of been lost in our party, quite frankly.
Okay, so there's two. Anybody else?
I would add to that maybe New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. He's someone who has faced some very public controversies that have really lowered his political stock, but it's still really early. He has a very compelling personality, and he's someone who on the campaign trail is very charismatic, so he's someone who might be able to make a comeback.
Let's talk about ideology among this group. What separates Republicans today, other than ambition of the individual candidates? Why would somebody choose one over the other? Personality aside, are there ideas that stand out, that attract voters to different candidates? Rebecca?
There are certainly a number of policy differences among Republicans, some that are standing out in this election cycle. Social issues like gay marriage and abortion. There is a social conservative wing of the Republican Party that is very passionate about those issues, and then there's a more moderate wing of the Republican Party that is more focused on foreign policy, national security, economic issues, and less concerned with religious and social issues. So that's one big dividing factor, especially in some of the early primary states like Iowa and South Carolina, where the voters tend to be a little more conservative on those issues. But in this election cycle, I think foreign policy is going to be one of the very big dividing issues among Republicans. You see some Republicans, namely Senator Rand Paul actually, who are a little bit more dovish on foreign policy and national security and want to see kind of a pullback from the United States on the national or international scale. And a lot of Republicans who say we need to be playing a stronger role abroad. And so that's going to be a big area of debate for Republicans.
Trent, and other divisions?
Immigration is a key dividing line, and Common Core, which is the public education system in the United States. It was adopted on a bipartisan basis several years ago, and since then it's become a real lightning rod for Republicans. Even Republicans that supported it are now denouncing it. I bring up Governor Jindal from Louisiana. So those are two. And then economic policy, I think, is going to always play a part. You have a growing divide between, say, a Jeb Bush who might want to take a look at the worth and the value of across-the-board income tax cuts as a real economic measure, because he's concerned that it's not lifting up the lowest income Americans. And he's talking about the fact that we have, an income divide. So I think there are subtle differences between the candidates, but I think they're real, and I think we're already starting to see them play those off. And to Rebecca's point, I think Senator Paul realized his weakness on defense, and he chose to announce his candidacy at a military facility in order to boost his defense credentials amongst Republicans in the midst of ISIS and the terrorist fight we're in right now.
And then it looks like there's at least one candidate out there who's a stalking horse to criticize Rand Paul, and that would be Senator Graham of South Carolina.
Yes.
And is he finding any resonance with his very tough message on foreign policy?
Well, he's not yet. He faces a number of problems, the foremost being that most people nationally do not know who Senator Lindsey Graham is. They see him maybe on cable news shows, but he doesn't have a national brand like some of these candidates do. Another potential problem for him is that because he's not polling very highly in these national polls early on, he might not make some of these debates at the very beginning, and that's where he would really shine. So if he doesn't have a debate stage, he might not make it very far in this contest.
Okay, when we come back, we're going to talk about how the field gets winnowed down to a handful of serious candidates and what puts somebody over the top to get the Republican nomination in just a moment. My panelists today include Trent Duffy. Trent has a quarter-century of experience in media relations, strategic communications, and public affairs, and he has served in top positions in the White House, on Capitol Hill, and with major corporations. He served in the George W. Bush White House for 4 years, including as Deputy Assistant to the President and Deputy Press Secretary. Prior to working in the White House, he served as Communications Director for the White House Office of Management and Budget, Press Secretary for the Republican National Committee, and he worked for 2 congressmen, as well as a spokesperson for New Jersey Governor Christie Todd Whitman, her successful re-election campaign. In fact, we're having Governor Whitman on this show in just a few weeks. Sitting to Trent's right is Rebecca Berg. Rebecca is national political reporter for Real Clear Politics, the daily Bible for anyone interested in politics and elections in America, and around the world for that matter. Previously, she was a political correspondent for the Washington Examiner, and she has written for BuzzFeed and the New York Times. So, 2 questions before we move on to how we winnow the field. First, despite all these candidates, is there anyone that you thought should be running that actually isn't running, that looked at the field and said, oh my gosh, it's too many, it's too tough, that you thought would be running but isn't running for president?
No, I don't think so. I mean, my former boss at the White House Office of Management and Budget and the former governor of Indiana, Mitch Daniels, who took a very close look at running last time. We all wished he would run, but he decided not to. But I think he's the only one that I think would qualify. And Senator Portman, of course, little surprise from Ohio, Senator Portman from Ohio, who just taken a very close look at running, and I still think eventually one day will be a candidate for the President of the United States. Him sitting out came as a bit of a surprise.
Okay. Rebecca, anybody?
I would add, I mean, as you noted, there are very few people who said no to running for president this time, but Governor Mike Pence of Indiana was thought to maybe be looking at it, but he's running for re-election instead. And then Rick Snyder of Michigan also took a pass. So they weren't really considered very serious potential candidates, but there was a little buzz around them. They both said no.
And of all the names that we've talked about, there's only one woman candidate on the Republican field, even though the Democrats are almost surely going to be nominating a woman. The one woman candidate isn't even a politician, Carly Fiorina. Why so few women? There are a wonderful array of Republican women politicians. Why are none of them running?
Well, there are fewer women politicians still than men who are politicians, so that's part of it. The Republican bench of women, a lot of them are younger, and so maybe they'll come up a little bit later. But this is a problem on both sides. I mean, there's only one woman running on the Democratic side too, just a pretty prominent one, right? But I think what is very striking this time is overall the diversity of the Republican field. Aside from gender, of course, only one woman, but you have Cuban Americans running. You have Bobby Jindal, who is Indian. He has roots in the, he's an Indian American. You have Ben Carson, who is African American. It's actually quite a diverse field, probably the most diverse field we've ever seen.
Okay. Now, how does somebody win? With so many candidates, you don't actually have to win a majority of votes. You just have to win a significant percentage. So do you become more outrageous? Do you go for the extremes? How do you win?
You start to build support amongst your base, and then you spread from there. And you say why you're running for president, and you go and you do the retail. And in February 1st of next year, the Iowa caucuses happen, and then in New Hampshire, that's shortly thereafter. And you try to get enough of the vote in those two states to basically put a stamp of approval on your candidacy, and you move on from there. And it even starts happening before then. I think voters in the Republican Party are starting to look carefully at the field and starting to make their decisions. And I think ultimately this comes down to who can best beat Hillary Clinton in the general election. If you recall, the last two candidates that the party selected were Mitt Romney and John McCain, not the two most conservative candidates in the race, despite all this discussion about how the Republican candidates got to run so far to the right wing. And that was a very cold political calculus by the party to pick the best person who could maybe win the White House. And that goes into a lot of the thinking.
Well, but take that one more step. Neither of them won.
Neither of them won.
So do the Republican voters say to themselves, let's try that route again with another moderate candidate? Or do they say, let's go for the gusto, a more radical candidate, maybe we can actually get the votes we need?
Well, that's the argument that you're seeing already play out among some of the Republican candidates. They're all making the case that they are the best prepared, the best equipped to take on Hillary Clinton in the general election. The conservative candidates, of course, pointing to these past moderate candidates and saying, well, look where that got us. But some more moderate candidates, such as Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, saying, well, look, we have more experience. And sometimes in a primary election, people are looking for more moderate candidates.
And they also, those two candidates particularly, have what both sides want very desperately, which is the Hispanic vote. It's the fastest growing part of the American electorate. Both Marco Rubio and Governor Bush have strong ties to that community, and they are using that to their advantage to make the case that if you elect me in the primary, it's going to give us the ability to reach into these communities that have rejected the Republican Party, and it gives us the best hope for claiming victory in the general.
Among all these candidates, who do you think Hillary Clinton fears the most? Rebecca?
I would say Marco Rubio at this stage. I think Hillary Clinton would be pretty happy to run against Scott Walker, and Jeb Bush helps her because it takes away the last name factor. It takes away this whole Bill Clinton presidency that she's going to have to address, because he would have to address his brother's and father's presidencies. It even takes away her past support for the Iraq War, because the Bush family obviously supported that too. Marco Rubio is scary for Clinton because he is a fresh face, he's young, he's basically her foil in every respect, but what they might feel good about with him is that he does have less experience than some of these other candidates.
Trent?
Yeah, I think that's right. I would put Jeb Bush in that top tier category just because in presidential politics, and the Clintons certainly know this as well as anybody, money and organization and discipline are key to winning. And the Bush organization and campaign structure is such that it's proven that it can win a national campaign. And fortunately for us, it's not easy to win a presidential campaign. So I think I agree with Rebecca in terms of the ideology and the way Rubio matches up. But in terms of the heavyweight slugfest, having another Bush-Clinton fight, it actually helps Jeb to run against Clinton, because it helps him too get away from the legacy factor, if you will, about how his father and brother also were presidents.
Okay, well, just last question. Which one of these 20 some odd candidates is likely to be first to drop out?
Oh, that's a great question. Maybe former New York Governor George Pataki.
Who just dropped in.
Just got in. But you know, he's in a lot sooner than some of these other candidates, and no one knows who he is.
I would have to second that. In and out for Senator or Governor Pataki.
And nobody would notice.
No one would notice, maybe.
We all love the good governor. He was a good public serviceman, but I don't see his candidacy taking fire.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Trent. Thank you, Rebecca, for joining us. This is a topic that'll be with us throughout the campaign. I enjoyed having you on our show. بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة وخاصة حول كيف يختار الجمهوريون مرشحهم، أرجو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على عنوان البريد الإلكتروني التالي insidewashington@alhurra.com. معكم روبرت ساتلوف. شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.